Welcome to The Digital Patient, where we discuss the latest advancements in digital patient engagement and share stories from the front lines. I'm your host, Alan Sardana, and with me as always is Seamless MD CEO, Dr. Joshua Liu. Today, we're joined by our special guest, Tony Ambrozie. Tony is Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer for Baptist Health South Florida, the largest not-for-profit healthcare organization in South Florida. He's responsible for all technologies and customer experience, as well as clinical, digital, and data transformation efforts. Before joining Baptist Health, Tony served as Senior Vice President, Technology and Digital at the Walt Disney Company. In this role, he was responsible for a number of digital and core systems and technologies, engineering, data analytics, and machine learning for Disney parks, consumer products, games, and publishing. Prior to joining Disney in 2013, Tony was Vice President for Digital Platform Technologies at American Express, where he was responsible for platform engineering, shared services development, and application security, with previous roles focused on application architecture, development, engineering, and performance. He is a proven leader in the technology and digital space with a keen focus on using technology and data to enhance the consumer experience. Tony also holds a dual MBA and master's degree in information management from the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. Tony, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me.
You know, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. You've led the most fascinating career from the front lines of digital transformation across several different industries: manufacturing, retail, hospitality, and now healthcare. From my understanding, though, you actually first got involved in this world of digital way back in high school, which actually led to you starting your own company, developing enterprise software for other companies before finally making the decision to pursue further education. Before we get into the weeds of this digital health conversation, I was really curious to know, what drove you to start your own company as opposed to working for an organization? Did you always have that entrepreneurial spirit, or fill us in there? Yeah.
And if so, how did I lose it? Yeah, absolutely. It was really in college, when during my first master's degree. This is before the two that you mentioned. And there was an engineering as to why I always wanted to make a big impact on the world and be the next Steve Jobs and maybe Bill Gates, but better Steve Jobs. And definitely doing my own thing under my own rules seemed the right way to go about doing that. It's indeed, I started my own company that was my first paying job, or maybe paying job opportunity, I should say. It was that startup indeed was focused on writing applications. This was early 90s, writing applications for small companies. But that led to, frankly, the value out of it was more the hard lessons learned, which turned out to be very valuable even later on, even in large organizations, than the immediate commercial or financial success in that startup. And these lessons really were, having a big vision, which we had. And, you'll probably hear me talk about vision and how important that is, vision and strategy for starting with that for digital. But then, it was also about having a customer focus, which probably we didn't have at the beginning. We started a little bit with what we wanted to code because it was cool. And, we had to pivot at some point. I remember going in front of what you would call probably a venture capitalist. I would say, here's my product. And then we were very proud of it. And he said, yeah, great. What else? So that was that. But also delivering in increments, because, we basically put all our money into that first release and we wanted it to be perfect. And it might have been perfect for the purpose we had, but not definitely not the right product. So that was interesting. But I remember later on when I got into doing some innovation in other companies, larger companies, I remember these lessons. I'm like, I wish I could read this. I read this book before I had those experiences, but hey, maybe you learn experiences when you actually experience them better.
Yeah,
And Tony, you've had such a amazing career at American Express and Walt Disney, leading digital and transformation there. And yet in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, you decided to switch into healthcare, which not a lot of folks would do in the first place, let alone in the middle of a pandemic. Why? Why did you do that?
Yeah, I get this question all often, and sometimes it's like basically you can hear the what in the world were you thinking in the middle of a pandemic? But so it's interesting. It's in truth, I joined healthcare as much as I joined Baptist, and here's why. I have been doing technology and digital for some years, as you mentioned, but each of the engagements that I had were not, running the production line, so to speak, business as usual. It was all about transformation and change and building better things always. And but at some point, every transformation is followed at some point by a steady state. And in each one of my previous jobs, at some point I reached that steady state where the adrenaline was gone, which is a good thing. Organizations cannot be in transformational upheavals all the time. They should, in truth, do transformation and change all the time in small increments. And as I was saying earlier, small increments means you can test it, you can learn, you can whatever, fail small. With AMEX about 2012, 2013, I said, hey, I've done some great work here. What's next? And then Disney came, Disney Parks. There was a lot of transformation there, and then the cycle continued. And then by 2019, I thought, okay, what is the next place where maybe I can make a positive impact? We all want to make a positive impact. Yes, we need to pay our mortgages, but at the end of the day, we live for that positive impact and the rewards, intrinsic rewards you get from that. And I thought clearly, healthcare seems to be that era. It's obvious as for any of us being patients and consumers of healthcare that probably technology is not great, and the digital experiences are less even than that. So. I thought, and I still think that there's so much opportunity, tremendous opportunity for change there and making things better. And so when the recruiter happened to call, I was convinced.
Oh, that's great. And you actually joined as their Chief Digital Information Officer, which is, I believe, just a split between Chief Digital Officer and Chief Information Officer. For other hospitals and systems that are thinking of creating that type of role, or even just the chief digital role, how would you describe what it is that you do, and why is it important for hospitals to really have a dedicated digital leader or a digital information leader?
Well, I must be careful what I say so I don't disappoint my boss when he's going to listen to this. Indeed, I am the inaugural Chief Digital Officer at Baptist, and you're right, I'm also the Chief Information Officer. I think, a lot of places these days do try to combine these two roles. In the past, I think they were separate because the CIOs were perceived, and probably they were, the previous generation, they were perceived as the people who just run the mainframe in the back end. And that was it, and they were not interested, frankly, in anything more. Clearly, digital is about experiences, intensely about experiences, but fundamentally is about technology, and you have to put that together. Yes, there are some other ingredients, clearly, but they're clearly very intertwined. What describes this or defines this role is very straightforward. As I said, I own all the technology and information capabilities, which is, you would say, a traditional CIO role, but with a big transformation agenda. Even outside digital, there's a lot of transformation that needs to be there for a variety of reasons. But in addition to that, and I think fundamentally my focus is on digital experiences, whether for patients, consumers, providers, and other folks, and defining and driving the digital transformation. And starts with always think first about the consumer or the customer, however you want to do it, and then look at how you can change the business or the business models or the business processes to meet that goal.
And Tony, I think what's interesting about healthcare is that you have so many different segments of users that could be the customer that you're building experiences for. So you have patients as consumers, and then you have clinicians as users in your infrastructure, administrators as well. How do you think about the fact, I guess maybe I'll back up. Do you feel as if you're serving 3 different types of customers sometimes? And then my follow-up question is, if so, like, how do you decide what to focus on for each set of customers in your digital efforts?
It's interesting because fundamentally you have to start somewhere. And yes, we do have a lot of customers, but I tend to focus on the real consumer because I think that drives and pulls, and there's a lot of discussion in healthcare about consumer-centric focus. Clearly, in the operating room, the center of the universe is the patient. But the question is, how is that happening in before and after? So while everybody is a consumer of digital experiences, including the physicians and the other providers and also other operations, we definitely start with the consumer. So in terms of prioritization, what's most important, what's most impactful, what needs to me the most. I tend to think that clearly on the consumer side we have the biggest gap. Some folks may disagree and say you don't understand. We need all this and that and the other in the clinical space, which they're true. But I think the consumer space is very important. And frankly, consumer, it's having access to care basically is care. And that's the first quality of care is being able to get it. And the more efficient and easier it is, the sooner you get to see somebody and maybe get the care that you need. So with that in mind, there are obviously the other criteria in terms of what's depressing, what's burning, but also with an eye on also keeping onto the vision and the strategy.
And Tony, I'm curious, when you focus on the consumer journey and you think about how you measure success, I've heard from some other digital leaders, they're using customer NPS scores or consumer NPS scores now about the consumer journey in their digital healthcare experiences. Maybe others focus more on activation rates for their patient portals or something else. Wondering, are there certain metrics that you think are most important right now in terms of measuring how well the consumer digital journey is going for your patients?
Yeah, and then we're still in work in progress. I think I started here maybe 20 months ago or so, but the true transformation, digital consumer focus started about a year ago. So there are a number of metrics that we have in place and others that do come in place. I tend to be of the opinion that yes, it's great to ask the consumers, hey, how did that work? What do you think? But I think it's a lot better to measure what they did, and how that, and it does require a certain level of sophistication into how you measure that. And years ago in my previous experiences, it was one of the measures was when you're on the site, if you seem to go up and down and left and right and all the time, clearly you're not finding what you need. And so and eventually when you do find it, we say, that's why this thing is so buried deep that people cannot find it. Let's rethink how we're presenting that or how we're navigating the consumer to that. Sure, it's the human mind is if you have a positive experience and followed by a negative experience, the overall experience or a perception will be negative. If at the end you actually have, you meet, you find what you want, and it's a good experience, you kind of forget about the not so good at the beginning. And so if you ask people, well, how did I go? And they would say, yeah, that's great because I found it and I solved my problem. But doesn't mean that, the first part might not have been great, or they could have abandoned it. And clearly, if you abandon the journey, that's where we go and look. But there are, macro KPIs of how many people use the self-servicing capabilities versus call, and that sort of thing. The difference being, when you do self-servicing, you have an account, you have a profile, so all that exists. So when the actual booking happens, or whatever it is, check-in, registration, you're a known quantity, so to speak. Nobody has to go and put in manually on the back end things. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate the nuance that you have in that perspective, and looking at the kind of holistic picture of what did the consumer actually do with the digital technology. In the past, Tony, you've actually contrasted the Disney consumer experience from a health system consumer experience, noting that when you go to Disney, you're in good spirits, you're in high spirits, you're there to have a vacation. But when you go to a hospital, you're often sick or you're in poor spirits. So I was curious, how do those differing situations change how you think about a digital consumer experience for Baptist Health, the patient journey versus what Disney's consumer journey would be?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We seek healthcare when we're not at our best, physically and emotionally. We just want to get better, to be better. You remember, the purpose is not to meet a physician or whatever, but to get better in reality. However that happens, if it happens, that's the goal. Unfortunately, we don't have magicians to kind of restore health, but that would work. If that works, that would be okay. In that case, you don't want hurdles, unnecessary hurdles. When we're looking for entertainment, we're not necessarily we don't want hurdles, but maybe we're willing to accept some here and there if it can be helped. And we talked about the perception at the end. But what that means is that it's both simple, but also incredibly hard at the same time, because then it means that in healthcare, which is a much more, don't get me wrong, it's a much more complex encounter or interaction than buying something on Amazon, at least from a perspective of a consumer, or going to a movie and buying tickets in advance. But in healthcare, the experience needs to be even simpler, and even more user friendly and devoid of unnecessary friction. So anything that is not critical and easy to provide should be rethought. And repetitive forms. I mean, I've always known this problem. Everybody has been saying, "Oh, I always get these forms. I have to fill them again and again and again." Right? Remember that? And in some places, now the form is digital, but it's still a blank form, digital or not. So you still have to go through that process. And frankly, sometimes it's for one interaction or for a simple interaction. Say, never mind. I'm not gonna do this. I'm just gonna scribble on the paper. So those are things that we need to be very mindful of, and not ask for things that we know, just in the unlikely event that maybe changed since yesterday, possibly, but 99% or 9% they didn't change. So maybe there's a simple way to say, yep, nothing changed. It's still me. It's still everything else about me. So we need to resist the temptation just to over ask and to simplify.
It's funny. I'm sure you have some, colleagues who are digital health leaders at other health systems. And I find that often they come from the healthcare environment. They've been in healthcare their whole careers, and now they're a chief digital officer. You came from a lot of really incredible consumer brands and companies. I'm wondering, have you noticed that going from, let's say, your experience to healthcare now, you've come with a different approach in some ways to digital than folks who been in healthcare their whole careers, and what differences have you noticed about how you've looked at things?
And certainly so. That's absolutely true. Not that those folks necessarily accept everything or not recognize the need for fluid experiences, but I think it's over time, maybe the past they could not solve for things, and then now they've come to accept a lot more, and sometimes as the vendors were never great, and you got the product from the vendor, and that was it, and you had to accept it because what other choices do you have? Now, clearly, from my perspective, maybe I'll slow down as well when I say, why are we asking for this? Why is this needed? And this is the part where the digital goes into the transforming some of the processes. Do we really need this? Sometimes the question is surprising, the answer. And the answer is not really. There are ways to, we had the e-forms and e-signatures elsewhere for 15 years or maybe less, a little bit less. But so clearly that you don't have to have a piece of paper with an actually scribbled signature. But as I said, sometimes it's because in the past they have not had choices, depending too much on vendor products that are too generic, and that's especially difficult when implementing in healthcare with all the old systems in the back and all the processes developed over time. So I wouldn't necessarily blame them for accepting things. But yeah, I'm the one that always says, why is this needed, and how can we do it simpler and easier?
I love that. Tony, in a previous podcast, you mentioned your propensity for execution, basically stating that creative strategy and innovation is only one side of the equation, but execution and strong execution is really where the magic happens. Given your broad focus that this transformation doesn't happen overnight, you've mentioned it earlier that it's incremental growth. What's your framework for determining which projects to tackle first?
Yeah, I think there's a saying that goes by something like strategy without execution is lunacy, or something like that, or vision without execution is lunacy. It's absolutely true. So, frankly, sometimes it's great to have both a great strategy and a vision and execution. Then you're probably called Apple. But frankly, if I had to choose, and I don't want to choose, but realistically, between a great vision and strategy and a inadequate execution, and a okay vision and strategy and a great execution, I'll choose the latter, because you need to get something, and then you can polish the or evolve the vision. But so that's why talking about vision and strategy, I start with defining a vision. I started with defining a vision, which is where do we want to be in X years, and usually X is no more than maybe 3, maybe a little bit more. Here at Baptist, I kind of split it in the first year and a half and the second year and a half, and we can talk about that, what you each had in terms of vision. And then define the strategy. How are we going to get there? And these are 2 elements that provide the rails for all the prioritization and choosing and the definition, all the subsequent decisions. Right, and because that's the way you say, hey, is this or that project or feature, is this aligning with the vision? Does it provide help towards that, or not? If not, we shouldn't be doing it. If yes, maybe there are some more tactical considerations. And as we said earlier, it's what is among all other things, what is providing the biggest bang for the buck now, or what it can be accomplished technically now, which is and how much impact is for a customer, which is usability, and what can be accomplished, which is really feasibility. I think I wanted to add to that a couple of things. One is defining the vision and the strategy. This is not that it's hard, it's having it crisp and clear, and but it cannot be degenerate into this all hands for months and years defining everything and never-ending exercise in futility, trying to please every agenda and have analysis paralysis. And now some consultants like that because they have people running the process, and the longer the process is, the better it is. But remember, vision is necessarily high level to just provide people, hey, we're going to be about there, and the strategy, especially for a not immediate term, will definitely be tweaked all the time. So no point in being bogged down in ultimate perfection. We said the vision and the strategy has to be very crisp and clear, especially, and this is where I'm channeling my inner Steve Jobs, just kidding, on being clear on what we're not going to do. You remember Steve Jobs said, I'm proud of the things that at Apple we choose not to do. It's true, because there's so much stuff that you can do. And some of it is valuable to that goal and that vision. Some of it is, okay, yeah, nice. So what? Just like my original product in the startup. And so, there always flies in, somebody says, oh, it's an operational, hey, can you do this thing? And can you do that thing? And that has to be managed carefully. Because otherwise it just derails the train.
So can I ask you, I'm curious, as someone who's been a digital and technology leader, you've probably seen a lot of situations where as you grow like a product or build something, it's better to subtract rather than add. Maybe we need less workflows, less features, et cetera. I find it difficult in healthcare where you have all these mission critical solutions. You have so many patients and providers using something on your systems. It seems almost impossible to remove features or workflows that probably don't make sense anymore, but everyone's still using them. Is it possible to do that? Like, how do you think about adding by removing complexity in healthcare when it seems that everyone just keeps using the complex things over and over?
Yeah, and there's a whole art and science about simplicity. I just read a couple of books over the weekend about that, and it's hard. Simplicity, that is. Complexity is very easy. It's just like an infection. You don't need to do anything to get complex. You're right, and then there's a lot of it. It's already there, and people say, "Oh, but we always had this, and we had this form, and then all this regulation." And you read the regulation, and in general, it's not as strict. There are some strict things, but not that many. And there are different ways to approach the problem. Yes, you have a regulatory body coming to see the data. Well, we can provide the data in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to be this way that is particularly complicated. Right. So I think, that's part of the process transformation and model business transformation that is associated with digital. And that's where, I'm maybe more of a process reengineering guy, expert versus a digital person. You have to appreciate that, or evaluate how much change can be made in any one time while you're still, because the goal is this for the customer, but how much does it have to be changed at this point? And there, it does require constant effort and constantly asking, is this really necessary? Is there a simpler way? I don't think anybody has a miraculous answer or formula other than intensely focusing and putting enough effort in getting maybe even asking the 5 whys, why, right? And so.
And the last answer is always, well, why? Because we've always done it this way.
Yeah, I get that sometimes, and there's a conversation, and yes, but also this is what's happening. But yeah. There clearly we need to do this, and because somebody said 10 years ago that this is the law, and that's where you say, okay, let's read the law. We're always going to follow the law, whatever business we are. but what does the law say in reality, right? So.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, look, as people say, oh, healthcare regulated. Oh, do you know how much regulation is in the financial services? Since I left, probably they added another 4 Basel protocols since I left AMEX. And do you know how complicated those are? Serious business with all the things going on there. So
yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a business to making things more complex in that industry, so that makes sense to me. Curious, Tony, actually, something that you mentioned earlier in the conversation was this idea of incremental growth, failing small to learn and really improve the products over time. I'm curious now in healthcare where there's things like patient lives at stake, and there's a little bit more, not an opportunity to necessarily fail in definitely not big ways, but maybe smaller ways. But has that changed the way that you've brought that philosophy to transforming digital compared to other industries?
Clearly, of course. Don't get me wrong. I mean, let's take an example outside, and I think I used this before, outside healthcare, right? You're getting on a plane. You hope that the software that went into the avionics of that plane, they've been very strict. Nobody did a try and fail quickly, that sort of thing, right? No pun intended to Boeing, but there's a lot of other stuff that, it's not going to be, that impactful. It doesn't mean that you put a reservation, mobile app for reservation for the tickets out there, that you lose the reservation and people's lives get distorted or impacted. But there's so much else where it's okay to not be perfect at all. I mean, fully perfect. And that's where you focus, and this is a matter of context, right? To be honest with you, it can be. People say, "Oh, big tech is used to, test and fail fast." But that's one area, or they do that in certain places, but not necessarily all of them, and you have to be, situationally aware or context aware. And I think you improve a lot. I think that you can get in a decent shape with 80% of the things, and the 20% are more complicated. And this is definitely one of the things about AI and ML. People are asking me, what are we doing in the operating room about the AML or whatever? And I'm like, probably not that much, because that's pretty complicated, and if we get it wrong, it is not a good. But outside that, if I use AI/ML to optimize, access or capacity utilization, that's still a value add to the patient because they get care sooner. So I'll focus there first while we take care of this one, which is a lot more complex and serious and with implications.
Do you find that in healthcare now, because AI and ML are such hot topics, that sometimes it feels like AI and ML is like a hammer looking for a nail, and you're having to.
Oh, absolutely, and generally it's not well understood, especially not its limitations. And then when people say, "Oh, it's not perfect," "Oh, we can't do it," and I'm like, "Yeah, normal operations are also not perfect." And you have to start with even explaining the confidence intervals. And then this magic box does not tell you, 0, 1. It gives you, 85 to 95%. Are you comfortable making decisions on that interval? That's a human aspect, not a AI/ML aspect or data aspect. That's one of the things that we're doing or we're building or we're deploying is something called care guidance, which is you have a problem, you don't know where to go first. Well, and then there's a process. Yes, collect data, and you can apply all sorts of algorithms, well-defined, or AI/ML. But at the end of the day, it's still a confidence interval. You have to make a decision of what you want to say. And if you don't have that confidence, well, just say, go to ER or something. But it's a choice that you have to make. but yeah, I always get, sometimes I get these. We're doing a lot more in there, and it's very, very precise. And it says we're going to solve this particular problem, and it will lead to this improvement with that cost. But I still get oh, look at that system they implemented. ML, why don't we do that? And I'm like, what do they do with it? So,
what's the use case?
What is the use case? It's interesting, AML, I don't know if you read about a lot of folks through this tool, legitimately at the pandemic and the understanding the virus better. But it was interesting, it didn't result in much. And the reason was simply because everybody duplicated everybody else's work. So they all basically did the meat and potatoes and the foundation, and they didn't collaborate enough for whatever reason, and they didn't learn from each other's mistakes, and so that was a problem. And people say, well, you see that this doesn't work. Well, we learn from that, and next time, hopefully, there's not going to be a next time like this. Knock on wood, but we'll do it better.
Yeah. Tony, you mentioned collaboration there and how important it is to, work together collaboratively. And one of your thoughts that you've shared in a previous conversation is on how to build a winning culture of innovation. And you actually indicated 3 kind of prerequisites that you have when hiring the right people and building this culture of innovation. The 3 points were: 1, have the right people who, in your opinion, are curious, versatile, optimistic, and accepting of uncertainty. 2, have a supportive environment. And then 3, have just enough funding to get started, and no more, no less. And I'm curious most actually about your second prerequisite there, in particular, learning about this environment. How do you foster an environment that is supportive and not hostile or judgmental?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would say that I believe on this one, leaders have an incredibly outsized influence in creating that environment, and leaders by courageous examples, self-examples, and actions influence and define culture. And culture is basically what people do when nobody is watching. That's a good definition of what culture is. And this is, you don't do that, you don't build culture by issuing orders, but by communicating and evangelizing and defining and rewarding and protecting during the inevitable setbacks. So, and leaders must understand and accept failure, and must be patient and measure progress not against the corporate APIs. That's not going to work. You just started, release 0.1, and then you say, okay, how much money we're going to make this with this first release? I'm like, I don't even know if this is going to work. And a lot of things don't work, but if it doesn't work, then I'll know how to make it work, maybe. Right? But so you have to have that. And ideas in general, new ideas and innovation, they're incredibly fragile things in a corporate environment, especially one that may be defined by short-termism, agendas or politics. And so leaders have, for that personal active involvement, must protect and nurture ideas and willing to go on a limb for them. And over time, that kind of builds the culture, and people see how things, we're animals that learn from each other even without words. And when you see how leaders behave and others behave, that builds that culture and that environment. So I think a lot of folks, a lot of big leaders or great leaders have done that success. But it's something that leaders must invest. And this is a topic I talk about when I talk about leadership. But that's not the only argument. But I find, and not that I have been nurturing innovation, but others, you name it, including in the CEOs that I watched in my past lives, so to speak, they did that.
Yeah, actually, it's a great segue. You've worked under probably the most world-class leaders of our time, Ken Chenault at AMEX when you were there, and then Bob Iger at Disney. You've also obviously built that skill up for yourself over the past decade plus of, how to really build this leadership skill that I think you've even said in the past, it's not 100% natural. It's something that you really have to work at and really build for yourself. And so, given that you've had this mentorship in the past from these world-class leaders, what is it that really, what do you recommend, or what makes a great leader in your eyes?
Yeah, and by the way, just to be clear, I worked in those organizations with Ken Chenault and Bob Iger, of American Express and Disney, tremendous leaders. Over time, I was nowhere near them, so I learned from watching them, not in any way mentorship. Just to be clear, I would love to meet them in person and spend time with them one day. Who knows? They're much more important people than I am, and they were truly remarkable. You can see this in the way the companies are today versus when they joined. And there are some leadership behaviors that are kind of distilled over the years, from them and from reading all those, a lot of leadership books. I would say though that indeed leadership is one of the hardest thing one can do, and you have to be dedicated to it in a sense of you want to make sure that you're improving, you're making the world a better world, not just I'm going to get a big job and a big title and a big office and big money. That comes as well, but if you don't have the first one. I think it was a recent tweet by Elon Musk that says, "Just don't do it." Right? So it's hard, and you learn all the time, and you fail all the time, and you keep learning, and by no means I'm there. So the path is still open for me, but I've defined, as I said, a number of leadership behaviors, and I call them behaviors because behaviors is what you do. Principles is what you enunciate, and then there's a long way between the two. But and so I would say courage and clarity in defining the vision and the strategy. We talked about that. Definitely build great teams and great leaders, and grow great leaders and strong leaders. Commitment, accountability. Decisiveness, execution with excellence. You have to strive for that in order to get somewhere. Change and transformation. And I think about the names we had. They all you might not know enough about those two companies, but there was change and transformation, not just the year after year evolution. Optimism, focus, it's just like on a particular, we decided on this. Yes, if we find that was the wrong decision, then we can think about it again. But if you're not, you stay on the course. Prioritization is we talked about maybe earlier, there are so many fly-ins that you have to. Curiosity and constant learning, and definitely integrity and authenticity, and maybe fairness. I'll add fairness. So.
And Tony, can I ask you? I mean, Disney is an Apple or great examples of companies where excellence, like you've mentioned, is a really important quality and a value there. In healthcare, especially the last few years, when I think a lot of organizations felt overrun by COVID, there's a ton of staff burnout, et cetera. It feels hard to preach excellence when people feel like they're underwater, and it's hard to breathe sometimes when you're tackling COVID and everything else. How do you think about still having a high bar for excellence in healthcare, knowing that there's just so much stuff going on the last few years?
So, but here's it's an interesting question. What I would say is the following: excellence doesn't mean you need to be like Apple or you failed miserably and you shouldn't do this. Excellence is you absolutely have to strive for the best you can do, right? And yes, if you're a nurse after 20 hours of a shift, seeing people die, it's very little you have left in terms of resources, but you've done everything that you could do. So you demonstrated, the excellence. Yes, you didn't save the patients, but nobody could have done. Now, in normal day when you don't have this, you strive for even more, and that's how I would define it. Yeah, 20 hours or whatever, 15 hours of seeing people dying, that's excellence. You reach that, and you've done the best you could possibly do. And it's like, I'm sure they're physically and emotionally drained, and you give whatever you can possibly have left. You give, that's excellence.
Love that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Tony, I know you're a huge reader. You've talked about it on other podcasts before and other forums, your passion for reading. And just this past weekend, you were reading a couple books, I heard. And I think I heard somewhere between 20 and 30 books a year, which is incredible. And so I'm really curious, where did this passion for reading come from? And how did you develop that habit?
Yes, you're right. I read a lot. There's a passion. I think I got it from my parents. They read a lot, and I think they must have collected, I don't know, maybe more than 1,000 books in the house. And they donated part to some local school, the library of the local school. So that's I think that's where it started. And I think one of the books that they had is on the shelf. It was the Larousse, which is the French encyclopedia. And so, I opened it, and it was interesting. And so somehow I taught myself some French and learning new interesting things. And I think that's kind of like how. But I do read all the time, and constantly about all sorts of things. It is. I have my books listed in the librarything.com. The books I mentioned earlier, just 2 books by Ken Segal. They're about simplicity. One is about, he was at least at some point in time, he was a creative director of Chaya Today agency, working for no other than Steve Jobs. And so he has interesting things about how Apple maniacally focus on simplicity. And I can share with you that is one piece of furniture I keep buying is a new bookshelves. So now I think I need another one, because most of the bookshelves are double booked, like one in behind the other. Like, that's not nice. But yeah.
What about like a Kindle? Do you prefer the paper?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Not Kindle. I don't for whatever reason, but I do have Apple Books.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm talking about is beyond the physical. The Apple Books is, I usually buy those if I want to have, and I take copious notes on my device, and they're good for reference. You go back and you say, what did they say about this? And I read and like, okay. But it's interesting. So I think it's a fundamentally continuous learning and growing. It's one of the fundamental things, and I think I mentioned in the leadership for a leader, and definitely for anybody else. As I've been reading a lot, most of the time these days, the books, are like, yeah, I know this and I know that, but it's still a good reminder, and I should do this more, and it's a validation or not. Hey, I'm still not doing this right. As I said, this is the journey to great leadership is a long one, and I'm not there yet. But so even if I read books on the same topics by different authors. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is overlap, and that's good reminders. Oh yeah, I need to remember to do this more often. But also very interesting new things, and like, okay, I didn't think about that. But yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So last question that I wanted to ask before we jump over to the Fast Five, Tony, is a question we're asking a lot more these days. There is currently this explosion of patient-facing technologies that are coming about in the past 2-3 years. Things like chatbots and digital care journeys, remote patient monitoring is obviously huge. What are you most excited about today from that patient side and consumer side?
Yeah, so we've split the strategy or the vision for, I mentioned earlier, for us in like two parts. One is about access, which is providing access to information and care, which is more traditional, I would say, but it's nevertheless very important. And then the second one is where different things. So the information EMR that I know, the information maybe from outside. If you provide your genome somehow, that's interesting. Social determinants are interesting, but then mapping or matching with mobile, and matching with the sensor in the watch or whatever device you have. I wear my watch nonstop, other than when it's being charged, and there's a lot of wealth of information being there. Can I put those things together in ways that maybe only I can do? Neither Apple nor the apps, health apps on the App Store have that, tie-in, right? To provide interesting health benefits. Yes, sensors are important. Remote patient monitoring, I think we should start with, they're all exciting, by the way. That's why you're asking. They're exciting because I think, it's interesting, at least the Western world is growing older. So aging, therefore we need more care, but also our health provider population is getting older, and we can't create new or make new physicians as fast as we need. So therefore, clearly we need some technical solutions to this problem. I think I wrote somewhere about that, and technology and as much as possible, as safe as possible and or reliable as possible, rely on technologies, remote technologies, whatever you can do at home. It's valuable. That's definitely exciting. And sometimes some people say, well, this wearable is not that accurate. And like, yeah, it's 15 plus and minus 15%. FDA is okay with it. And then they say, but look at me, this device gizmo here, it's $30,000 and it does the same thing as this, but it's only 3% plus or minus 3%. But when but I take 2,000, measurements a year on this thing. There's a lot of data. So, one data point from one visit per year. That's and who knows what state you were in. It's not as valid as 2,000 reads here. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, awesome, Tony. Just being mindful of your time, let's shift over to the Fast Five. It's basically 5 questions to get to know you better for our audience. First question, and this might be difficult because I know your library of things, like you mentioned, has over 580 books right now. But do you have a favorite book or book you've gifted the most?
Yeah, this is the hardest question because there's so many and there's so. And it's mainly like the favorite book. I have several favorite books, but since we talked about leadership, we talked about Bob Iger. He has a great book. I refer to it as a personal history disguised in a leadership book in a MMR disguised in MMR. There are some books that speak to extreme ownership and leadership by Stanley McChrystal and Jocko Willink. I think I pronounced the name correctly, and that's very important. And those people are from the military, but this is not about military. It's not about giving orders. It's about taking accountability as an individual and as a leader. But I read a lot of historians' books, books on historical readers. I've been reading, some history books from Yuval Noah Harari, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Homo sapiens and Homo Deus, and then 21 lessons for the 21 centuries. So these are the kind of things I read and recommend.
Nice, I love that. Question 2, Tony, who's a person, dead or alive, who you'd love to meet?
Abraham Lincoln.
All right.
I think he's a remarkable man or person and a remarkable politician and leader with a remarkably small ego. You talk about the team of rivals and his cabinet, and you have to be very confident in yourself to bring all your leaders in that room. So, but then also with a remarkable love for and trust in the country, and with a more remarkable ability to evolve his mindset about the political and slavery context of the day from where he was where he ended up. So did I mention remarkable?
That's a great, perfect. Question 3, would you rather have super strength, super speed, or the ability to read people's minds?
Neither. I think I think the ultimate would be to obtain wisdom. And that's why I pursue knowledge, because knowledge you pursue with reading and but wisdom, I think it's based on knowledge, but it's based on the distillation of knowledge, and the reflection upon knowledge. And so that's what I would say. Wisdom is what we should all strive to, because it's wisdom, not knowledge, that makes the world a better place. Eventually, yes, you need knowledge to design some gizmo, or clearly build the tools to save things like global warming, but it's the wisdom for us to actually make that move or to decide on those policies. So let's go.
Yeah, makes sense. Question 4, what do you believe in healthcare that others might find insane?
I think it's that it can transform in a dramatic way, in a way that it puts the consumer across the entire journey in the absolute center, not just in the moment of providing care, and that also that the fact that a lot of the quality of life will come from places other than hospitals. We talked about the technology, and that. So healthcare doesn't necessarily mean a particular set of the way we're organized today, whether here in this country or elsewhere. It just means caring for health and obtaining that health or maintaining that health.
Yeah. No, I love that. Last question that we have, Tony, this is more of a pandemic related question. And I know you joined Baptist South Florida in the midst of the pandemic, but what is one hobby or activity you've gotten into since the beginning?
So, I will say that because of the work from home, a lot of work from home, I've been able to exercise a little bit more. Whether that's, I think it's useful. It's definitely useful. Other things like reading and learning and reflecting our lifelong habits. I could say that the only thing that I could add is that I am happy to report that I kept up with my French. I told you the story how I started. I never had formal education in French, and somehow I learned it through the books that I read. Some of the materials I had in my first master in engineering were books in French, technical books in French. So, but then I kind of nothing, and then I was responsible from the U.S. for the technology team in Disneyland Paris. So that came just before the pandemic. That came handy, and so I'm pleased to say that I kept up with my French. So.
Wow. So. Congrats. No, that's awesome, Tony. Well, being mindful of your time, let's wrap it there. But I do want to thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your time with us. You've shared wisdom with us, really, not just knowledge, but actual wisdom that's come from one of the most fascinating careers that we've had on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time. I just want to say that's a wrap for this episode of The Digital Patient, hosted by Seamless MD. Follow us on Twitter @SeamlessMD. And if you like the podcast and you want to learn more, please visit www.seamless.md. Tony, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.